one way or another, that strange things are happening in the world today. So strange that some people sort of fall to pieces when they start to contemplate the situation. Never in the history of the world has there been such a situation as we witness now. For example, the taking over of Western Europe by Muslims, simply by getting into boats, crossing the Mediterranean and entering whichever country they wish to enter. There has been much talk lately about the role that Russia is playing in this, and people are starting to heap a lot of praise upon the current Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, and compare him to the American ones and others. And in a sense that's okay, because it may help you sort out what's happening where. But what I wanted to tell you was that you need to be aware about whatever good is coming out of Russia, where it comes from. For 70 years or so, the Slavic peoples and others endured unbelievable horrors from communist regime. The regime that targeted Orthodox Christianity more than it targeted anything else. And it had no shame in writing that into its protocols and teaching it to its children at school and in other places. And after that period, after some 100 million souls were put to death on account of their faith in God and non-belief in that communist political regime, it turned out that Christ won in the end, as he normally does. And if any good is coming out of Russia right now, it is based on that saying that our Lord Jesus Christ gave, that unless the seed falls on the ground and dies, it will bring forth no fruit. So, for a person like Putin and whichever other leaders may arise out of Russia, perhaps even an emperor, which is what many of the righteous and holy fathers prophesied would happen, is the fruit of that dying that has occurred over those decades. We are starting to see that fruit, and hopefully it will continue to grow and bring forth more fruit. And especially those who are not in the church, who don't know about Orthodoxy, might come to some sort of realization of why has this country, which has been in such dire straits for so many decades, all of a sudden rises and becomes a major player in world events for what seems to be righteousness, rather than for some evil things. Because right now, out of Russia, there is no preaching or any sort of activities which are trying to promote some sort of anti-Christian ideas. How that will come to an end and how that will progress, we will all see. And we'll probably see it quicker than we imagine. But I just want to repeat to you that whatever good does come out is not due to one person, one individual like Putin, but to the martyrdom of all those millions that died for Christ, that their death was not in vain, that they would see the bringing forth of righteousness and goodness from that sort of situation. The other thing that I wanted to tell you today was from the Gospel that we have just read of St. Luke about our Lord Jesus Christ, who repeats to us the high commandment which no other faith and no other religion, no other belief has, which is to love your enemies and to do good to them and to ask nothing in return at all, on account of the fact that when that sort of thing is performed by us, there is a great reward in heaven, because that person who does that acquires Christ likeness, because it says there that ye shall be sons of the highest, for he is kind to the unthankful and to the evil. In the 1970s, and especially in the 1980s, many of the writings of the Holy Fathers began to be translated into English and basically spread around the world. And people were able to read this material for the first time, grabbing something that was different from what they understood. For example, the book of the Philokalia, which is a series of sayings, not in any particular order, from a multitude of Holy Fathers from the early centuries of Christianity. In all of those sayings and advices, directions, the Holy Fathers are showing us how we may acquire Christ likeness. And it is not something that is obtained very quickly, which especially St. John of the Ladder makes a point of. If you don't know about St. John of the Ladder, I have mentioned him many times to you, and even during Great Lent, we read much from his works. 30 steps he has divided into the way that we should go a step at a time in order to attain some sort of Christ-likeness and to become acceptable to our great calling of being Orthodox Christians. Even the first step is extremely difficult. It says that we need to renounce the world. Renounce the world. By that is meant all those sorts of distractions and pleasures and interests, and all those sorts of things that the materialistic world brings forth to us. And pushes us away from the one thing needful. When these books started to be published, particularly in the 80s and thereafter, people who had no experience with orthodoxy read them. And there were some questions raised. Is it a good idea to have this material given to people who are not instructed in the faith? Because in a century before, in the 1800s, the patriarchs and the bishops, the church, actually prohibited the publication of that sort of material on a large scale and its distribution to the general public, because they feared that those who read that without guidance and without understanding end up in a state of delusion. It's not hard to do that. You may think that, oh, I won't be deluded. Oh, I am somehow able to discern. Well, I can tell you one thing, that if you were to read 5 or 6 poems of Saint Simeon, the new theologian, you would be immediately in a state of delusion, because he is on such a high level that when you read it, you somehow get swallowed by those words and believe that you too are in that state. When this occurred, the bishops and the people who were considered to be good guides in the church were asked, should this material be published? Should it be put throughout the world on account of the fact that many might fall into delusion? And the answer was, let them. Let them. Let them have access to that material. And if they fall into delusion, let them. Obviously, they saw something that an ordinary person doesn't see. But our Lord Jesus Christ, who brings all souls who are sincere to salvation, can even use that to change a person and return him back to the righteous path. When a person does fall into that state of delusion, that return is often extremely painful, very painful, and often takes a long time. One of our spiritual fathers, whom you all know, the Blessed Father Seraphim Rose, who came to Orthodoxy out of a Protestant background, reached some height in spiritual life. And people often came to him for advice and asked him about various things. And he said to some of them once that he knew of a man who got hold of these spiritual books of a high level, particularly about the Jesus prayer, and began to practice the Jesus prayer. And every day, every morning, said thousands of Jesus prayers and did heaps and heaps of prostrations and all those sorts of things that we understand is part of the piety of the church. Living in an apartment, sort of a high-rise one of the people who I think was living below, who was not a Christian, instead of doing prayers in the morning, played demonic music, some sort of rock and roll or whatever it was. And this person who was practicing the Jesus prayer could stand it no longer, started to throw dishes and plates and whatever at this other person. By that he demonstrated the right state of what he was really in. He was in a state of delusion, quite obviously. Because if he could not tolerate something like that and put his hope on saying thousands of Jesus prayers each morning, but his soul was not really changed into the direction of Christ likeness. I'm telling you these things because all of us, every one of us has great difficulty today in discerning how we are to go about aspects of our spiritual life. And we often mix up what should be first, what should be second, what should be third or fourth or fifth or anything like that. Because when you mix those sorts of things up, you start concentrating on something which is not relevant to yourself and neglecting the most important one. Just like that person who was saying all these prayers, yet had no qualms about throwing his dishes at him and trying to do harm to him. I think you understand what I'm trying to say. There is a sort of stepwise way in which we come to Christ. And we always have to find what is the main thing, the one main thing at a particular point in time, which is bothering us, which is stopping us from progressing. And that is sometimes very hard to find. Often it's not what you think it is. That's why when we can, we go on pilgrimages, we try to write to people around the world who are considered to be of a high spiritual level, elders and whatever, and sort of open our heart to them and hoping that they will return an answer to us on which sort of thing and what should we do. That is very important. In other words, we don't put trust in ourselves. We don't put trust in ourselves. Today it's very hard to sort of find somebody of that high spiritual caliber and ask them these things on a regular basis. And therefore we do have to take that risk of hit and miss. Do something which seems to be right at that point in time. And through the mercy of God, we will find out sooner or later whether what we did and the direction that we went in, whether it was indeed pleasing to the Lord or not. If it was not, probably find ourselves deeper and deeper into trouble, spiritual trouble of various kinds. Unfortunately, that is the biggest lack that we have in the world today. There are just not enough wise people for us to have access to them. There are wise people, but it's hard to have access to them. And when I say wise, I mean wise in the sense of showing us how to walk the path of Christ likeness. Our spiritual father, from the writings of the Holy Fathers, I'll repeat this to you again, gave a very general outline that first and foremost in our lives is our giving over to Christ, who is the one at the top of the pyramid of our life. The keeping of his commandments are so important because they are the ones that determine which way we go. And if you don't know what his commandments are, my goodness, what can I say? In the Old Testament, they're set out quite well under the Ten Commandments that Moses received, and in the New Testament they are set out in the Beatitudes, and then in all the writings of Apostle Paul and others. The second tier, if you like, of responsibility to us is our spouses, if we have one. That we have to help each other, because a married person is like a half of the other. But as St. Paul says, husband, don't think that you can save your wife, or wife, don't think that you can save your husband. That's not the point. The point is to live in such a way so that the rough edges of our personalities are smoothed out, and that we indeed become, as Christ says today in the reading, compassionate and thankful for all things. Compassionate meaning that we are able to very easily forgive, and even in the first instance, try not to do any harm to the one who is the other half of ourselves in our lives. After that second tier come our children, if we have any, to raise them in the piety of Orthodoxy. I sent a couple of them off just now as a sort of a Sunday school situation to read about the saints of today. But where do children really get their juices from, if not from the parents? However the parents behave, whatever the parents do, that's where the child sees whether they are sincere in their love for Christ and for their Christian activity. After that come our other relatives, if we have any, whoever they may be, in-laws, parents, cousins, extended family, and whatever. And then come our acquaintances, and finally our the people that we interact with in the world who are probably not of the Orthodox faith. And in all of those ways, you need to know how to act and how to behave and what to do, because your actions are going to speak greater than your words. Greater than your words. And that word compassionate should be so chiseled into your heart and your mind that it stands above all things. As I said to you also at other times, that Christ also divided people. He divided him into friends who were the apostles, the ones closest to him, the ones who had already knew many of the mysteries that are of a high level. Then the brothers, the sisters, the mothers and the fathers. In other words, all those who were of the church and struggling away to attain Christ likeness. And finally the neighbours, upon whom it's not wise to throw dishes, the ones that are not of the church, who are not baptized, who don't belong, who may even be enemies of the church. And we are asked to love them and do good to them, asking nothing in return, and then your reward in heaven is great. My goodness, what a great calling this is. What a great calling this is. In nowhere here is there anything about doing harm to another, like there are in many other faiths. Chop their heads off or something like that. In nowhere here is there any teaching about slandering, saying bad words, fighting, or anything of that type at all. At all. Because that is not Christ-likeness. That is not Christ-likeness. And if those sorts of things exist in your life, then those things need to be put right before you can even go that step of pretending that you can pray. Because if those things are not right, your prayers don't reach the Lord at all. It's like somebody who has learnt to add and multiply, and he's trying to do calculus as well, without doing all the things in between. God willing, through these things that we now have access to, and in such an easy way, you can turn on or have your iPhone in the morning or whatever, and there you will find the Troparian for the day, the Kentuckian for the day, the reading from the Gospel for the day, the reading of the Epistle for the day, a short history of the life of the saint or whatever incident for the day. All there. You don't have to turn pages or anything. It automatically turns for you on a particular day. So that's a good use of the technology that belongs to us. And that's how we should use it. Because with that sort of technology, we can zero in much, much quicker on the things that we need to be working on in our own lives. What more can I say about the situation that we live in, other than the necessity for us to be extremely careful and extremely vigilant about what is happening in the world, because things are not necessarily what they seem. I know that most of you understand that behind the facade that is presented to us on a daily basis in the media stands Antichrist, who holds most of the media, most of the things that are presented to us around the world. And that is the diet that most of the world gets, a dose of Antichrist. Not the Troparians, not the Kentuckians, not the readings from the Gospels, the Epistles, or anything like that. But a totally different picture. A picture where white is presented as black, and black is presented as white. And you need to be able to discern that. May the Lord help us with this discernment. And if you can find for yourself a God-bearing father or mother to help you in that, then do that and hang on to them. And don't be surprised if sometimes they tell you things that can shock you and which you never thought of, but which are stopping you from progressing further in your spiritual life. May our Lord help us with this, and all the Holy Fathers and all the Holy Mothers. And may we be good examples, whether it be to the small community around us, or maybe even to the rest of the world. Amen.